Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, hey everybody, the show must go on. I'm sorry, I had to do it anyway. I'm going to live stream this sucker one way or another. Welcome everybody, my name is Tony Darnell. I'm from deepastronomy.space, and today we had a Future in Space hangout about gender issues in space. Now, the reason I say had was I had technical difficulties getting this stream to start. So I went ahead and because my guests could not, go around to other. They didn't have another time slot. I went ahead and opened up a Zoom meeting and recorded our hangout, which I am now going to stream live for you right now. And I am going to put up the lower thirds, and I'm going to try and show the PowerPoint presentations as we talked. Hopefully some of you are going to be here watching it live, but if not, at least I will have done the hangout. It will have been posted, and I didn't have to skip one because this is a really good topic. It's a very interesting one, looking at the research that's currently being done at NASA on the gender issues in space. And there are quite a few, and there's a lot to think about. So my guests today are Dr. Bette Siegel. She is from NASA HQ. Also, Dr. Saralyn Mark. She is the president of iGIANT. They are going to introduce themselves here in just a moment on the recording. If you would like, I'm also going to be looking at the live chat while it goes on. So that will be something I'll be able to have time to do because I'll be playing this video as it goes along. Let me know what you think. Stick with me afterward, and I'm going to vent for a little bit because I've got some stuff to say about this whole problem. So let me bring up my hangout. And is it Betty or Bet?
It's Betty.
Betty. Okay. And Saralyn, you are both. Okay, so I guess what I will introduce you. Actually, I'll have you introduce yourselves, and then I will. We'll start going over the hangout.
Actually, introduce yourself, then introduce Harley, and I'll do the double AS stuff.
Yes. Well, I'll
make sure to do that.
Assuming I will. This isn't going to be like the normal. I'm going to record my own introduction, so we'll do it, and I'll introduce the video as well.
Okay.
So let's just pretend all that's done. And why don't we start with you, Betty? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do at NASA HQ?
So I'm Bette Siegel. I'm in Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate. I'm a program executive there. And one of the tasks that I worked on was the impact of sex and gender on adaptation to spaceflight. And it's a project that Dr. Saralyn Mark and myself have been working on for 18 years, according to her. And so we're happy to introduce it and for me to introduce Dr. Saralyn Mark.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Saralyn Mark. I'm a physician, an endocrinologist, and a geriatrician. I was the senior medical advisor at NASA headquarters for over 18 years. I am the founder and president of a nonprofit called iGIANT. And since I worked with NASA, I had to have an acronym, and that stands for the impact of gender and sex on innovation and novel technologies. And our basic mission is to accelerate the translation of research into gender and sex-specific design elements. And I had the pleasure to work with Betty for all these years to increase the focus on sex and gender and how the body adapts in space so that both our astronauts and all populations who travel into space can live well and healthy and work safely.
Okay, great. And I should also mention that I have your you can't see it because it's on another computer, but I have your PowerPoint presentation handy if you want to show any of the slides. I wonder if I can get, well, I can pull them up and then share my screen if you want to talk about them that way.
A good idea because they're the beginning of it. That's the way we plan to introduce our talk.
All right, good. So let me go and find that. And Harley, while I'm doing that, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and the hangout.
Hi, I'm Harley Thronson, and I'm co-moderator, co-organizer with Tony here, and we've been doing these hangouts for on and off for about 2.5 years. And we've been covering a wide range of topics. Those of you who are regulars know this, from ethics and biology and technology, human exploration, robotic exploration. And of course, now one of the most important issues, which our guest today this afternoon will be talking about, and that is the issue of sex and gender in space exploration. And I'd like to ask our two guests a little bit of background, although we might be seeing this in the PowerPoint, a little bit of background. So you've been saying the better part of 2 decades, the two of you have been working on this. So, excuse me. So how long has this area of research with respect to human exploration, how long has that been part of NASA? Does it go back from the very first days of NASA? Or were the two of you pioneers in this?
Yes, it's a great question, Harley. Let me give you a little bit of history about the impact of sex and gender just within the policy realm for the government. Back in the 80s, there was an effort to move women's health from what we call traditional bikini medicine models of reproductive and occasionally breast health into looking at sex and gender. And I want to be clear, we're using the Institute of Medicine definition to define sex and gender, whereas gender is the psychosocial construct, how one deems oneself as male or female. Sex is more the biological construct. And with the flow of epigenetics, we know that the environment influences the genome, and how you interact with the environment influences, we have our charts, and how the environment, can we go back? That kind of was, can we redo that part?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we use the Institute of Medicine definitions to define sex.
Well, do you want that up or not?
Yes, so show that slide, please.
Okay.
And basically, gender is really the psychosocial construct. Sex is more the biological construct. And with the influence of epigenetics, basically how one interacts with the environment can influence the genome, we realize the definition is a lot more circular. And at times we use a binary definition, but I want to be clear, it's really a continuum, but it just helps us to have the dialogue and discussion. Back in the early 90s, there was something called the NIH Revitalization Act, which was passed in 1993, and that was through the NIH, of course, and that was to look at sex and gender in their studies, in phase 3 studies, and to look at valid analysis. And then throughout the government, these policies began to percolate. And Betty and I began working on these issues in the late 90s when we did our first decadal review to look at the impact of sex and gender. And it was a good time to start doing it because we had begun to gather data. One of the challenges we had with our first decadal review was a lot of the data between men and women was basically pooled. So it was hard to discern differences. And I think after the first decadal review, we were much more aware, more cognizant, and I think did a better job in regard to ensuring our investigators really look at sex and gender, try not to pool the data. And that's why when we talk today, we'll discuss our second decadal review where we had a more robust database to ascertain if there are differences between our male and female astronauts and what its impact would be on health.
Okay. Did you want me to put up some other slides?
Yes, you can show the next slide.
Okay. Let me. Boy, it's so different when we're not doing this live.
There we go. A lot less pressure.
Yeah.
So we're going to be all 4 of us are going to be edited to be incredibly articulate.
Oh yes.
No gaps, no ends and ers.
Could be a good tool for everybody.
This one may be, I don't know if this will be edited out. So here's a question. Has the sex and gender research for NASA or associated with NASA and human spaceflight been led by women? Has that been one of the major contributions that a growing number of women in human exploration have had to NASA?
No, we did, Saralyn and I in 2011, basically, I think is when we started in 2012, and then we published the articles in 2013. We had 60 scientists and clinicians involved, and it included both men and women.
Yeah, and I really want to be clear about this. We're not talking about who's better, faster, smarter. It's just different so that we can develop the countermeasures and policies and programs so that both male and female astronauts benefit. And that ensures that we have a healthy workforce. And we also want to ensure that both men and women are investigators, as well as clinicians, as well as engineers. Everybody really has to understand these issues.
Very good. Good. And then in current NASA administrative structure, NASA headquarters, within which office is your work located?
So the actual work is in the Human Research Program, and that is located in HEO under SBSRA, Space, Life, and Physical Science Research.
Yeah, so HEO supported the decadal reviews But I want to say that it really cross-cuts every directorate, every division within NASA, from research to clinical care with our policies and protocols with what we do to take care of our astronauts, to even the engineering community. And I think one of the exciting offshoots is education and outreach. So we inspire the next generation to really see the world through a sex-gender lens, because this is where we are today in science and where we have to be in every element of our lives.
I think that's a very good point. One of the topics we may have in a future Hangout, which you just suggested to me, is that is a presentation about the Human Research Program. Broadly speaking, it's a terrific. I'm a little bit familiar with it because of some other work that I do. It is a terrific and fascinating program in and of itself, and on the impact that it has on future human exploration.
So Harley, back last year, back in May of 2017, NASA launched a Sex and Gender Impact on Technology Challenge competition. And the awardee was an engineer from Armstrong who designed a concept for a modular spacesuit design. His prize was an object flown on the International Space Station. So in that sense, we were able to take it agency-wide to get really everyone attuned to what these issues are and to get them on board so that they see the world again through a sex-gender lens.
Very good. Great. How are you doing, Tony?
I'm ready. I'm ready. So do you want me to pull up the decadal survey slide? Okay. Hang on here. Here we go. Gonna do things differently this time. Okay, so here, do you see it?
No.
There we go.
Now we do.
Okay.
So in 2011, there was a decadal survey for the space and life physical research programs, and it recommended that the researchers need to focus on sex and gender and look at the mechanisms and study what effects there might be. You can go to the next slide. And the next slide basically uses the exact words that were in the decadal. And our workshop and study that we did was in response to this recommendation. And so as I said, we had 60 scientists, clinicians. We had people within NASA who were part of the Human Research Program. We also, and NSBRI at the time, National Space Biomedical Research Institute, as well as experts who study sex and gender in academia and other government agencies. And from this, we broke up into different work groups of studying cardiovascular, neurosensory motor, reproductive, behavioral health, immunology, and musculoskeletal. And then we published 6 articles on that, as well as an executive summary, including a commentary by Dr. Saralyn Mark. So, and that was the results of this study. And you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
This was an old slide of the statistics, and so I'm not going to focus on it too much, but it showed at the time when we did our study, Dr. Peggy Whitson had 377 days in space. In the slide, she actually broke the record for the most days in space.
She has just retired, yes?
She just retired, and she had 665 days in space.
Holy moly.
Yeah, and so the important part about this is that the astronaut corps is male and female, although up until recently it was always less than 20%. Our statistics will show that it's increasing to about 30%. But we also know that there's commercial space, and we envision that both, men and women equally will probably soon be flying in space. And that was the whole point of what we did. We wanted to make sure that the countermeasures and the research that we do protects the health of both men and women. And as Saralyn was saying, we weren't trying to determine who was better or anything like that. It was really to make sure that both were protected.
And when you talk about differences, sometimes people connote that with a negative element, and we don't want that to be the case at all. We're in a world today with 3D printing, with precision medicine and the use of biomarkers, with even statistical computing and using our computers to help with designs, so that when we look at differences, we can actually begin to tailor what we need to meet the needs of the individual. And I think when you do that, you get a better work environment, you have better outcomes, and you can do it with quality and safety.
So this is a very specific, I mean, there are a lot of, I mean, you said that earlier in an earlier slide that there was a critical lack of information about, you know, the studies of a lot of the effects of space on both genders. And we did some hangouts last year with Arnold Nicogossian, and he has written a book with the space physiology and things like that. I didn't get a sense that there was a lot of work on the gender issues, but there was a lot of work on just the general health effects of being in space. And so can you start by, maybe my question is, are there things that are common to both genders that we need to worry about? And then what are the ones that are specific to each gender?
So we did that, and I think if we just go through the slide just a little bit, we can get to that point.
Okay. Let's see.
So Dr. Arnold Nicogossian, I worked with him for 18 years in the same office, and we tell him that he's the father of the American Space Medical Program, and his textbooks really provided, I think, a clarion call that we needed to be attuned to the needs of men and women. He integrates these issues throughout his books. So he has been a wonderful pioneer of looking at sex and gender-based healthcare and certainly research.
Anyway, the comments you made are some of the things that we're going to go through. And what our study did is we looked at known differences here on Earth, medical things that have been determined medically. So, for example, we know that certain medicines, like Ambien, I believe, is used at a much lower dose for women. Women respond to it, and if you differently than men do. And
Ambien is the medication that's supposed to help you sleep?
Yes.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, the FDA has a policy to try to encourage industry to look at sex and gender differences regarding the pharmacotherapeutics, so pharmacokinetics and dynamics, of basically men and women metabolize drugs. And we see that there are significant differences. And the General Accounting Office several years back actually had 8 out of 10 drugs pulled off the market because they were more toxic in women. What complicates our situation with space medicine is that we know we're altering pharmacokinetics and dynamics, basically how we metabolize drugs in space, because, for example, right now we're going around the planet every 90 minutes, and our circadian rhythms are different, and our hormonal milieu changes, and even body weight change, and distribution of fluid, and all that impacts how we are able to handle medications. So we look at terrestrial models, and then we adapt to what we need to have in space.
And there were other differences we know on Earth. For example, when someone has a heart attack on Earth, we all know these, that you have sharp pain on your chest and it shoots down your arm. But that really is what happens to men. That may not happen to women. Women may feel more like indigestion or have trouble breathing. Their symptoms could be much more subtle. And so doctors have to be trained to look at these other symptoms. So we took these differences, these are examples of differences that we know happen on Earth, and we studied them and looked at them to see in the published data and in the unpublished data to see if it happened for women in space as well.
So we had 6 work groups, as Betty mentioned. We really wanted to make sure we took an integrated approach. As I earlier mentioned, we traditionally looked at quote-unquote women's health from a reproductive and breast model. We wanted to ensure that every single system in the body was evaluated because there are differences. And with space, what's amazing about space is that it's an extraordinary platform to study this because small changes actually have profound impact. And these changes happen very quickly and they happen very dramatically. I'm a geriatrician, so for me, space has an added benefit because many of these changes are similar to what we see with accelerated aging. And what we are trying to do then is minimize these changes through our countermeasures and then also help our astronauts go back to their baseline through what we do on Earth for rehabilitation and other activities to try to promote health and well-being.
Did you say that the aging process is faster?
In space, every single system of the body changes, and many of those changes are very similar to what you see with aging. So in a sense, it's accelerated aging.
Oh,
but
wow.
what's very exciting is that through some of our countermeasures and some of our rehabilitative procedures and measures that we do back on Earth, we can even slow down and reverse some of these findings.
And how do you do that?
Well, for example, let's take, for example, musculoskeletal health. As we age, we lose bone mass. Our peak bone mass occurs around the age of 30, 35. And then after that, there's a very slow diminution of bone loss till, for example, women go into menopause and then it accelerates. And men also have a loss, tends to be a little later, and they build up their bone banks. So the detriment may not be as significant, but we still worry. And most people don't realize that, for example, when a man has a fracture on Earth, he has a higher mortality, higher death rate within the first year of that fracture for various reasons. So when you go into space, you begin...
I did not know that.
Absolutely fascinating. And again, one of our bias that we have in medicine is we don't even ask men and our male patients about their bone health, because it's extremely important to protect bones. And we've learned a lot about bone health from our studies of our astronauts in space. When you go into space, you immediately begin shifting calcium out of your bones because you're in a microgravity environment. You need gravity, you need resistance to maintain bone strength and muscle strength. And what happens is over time, your bones become thin, and that's a state of osteopenia. And when it's a very severe state, it becomes osteoporosis, which increases your risk for fracture. So what we currently do is we have our astronauts exercise several hours a day. We're looking at medications also to slow down bone mass and other medications to potentially build back bone. And we also look at dietary measures because we know that has a significant interplay as well. So we have learned quite a bit about bone health, which has amazing interest and need for what we have to do to protect people here on Earth.
So because you're in oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Betty.
Well, I was just going to say that's an example where we would expect, in a way, that women might see bone loss or muscle atrophy more so than men, because we see that at an earlier age with women on Earth. However, when we looked at the data, because they do the countermeasure and exercise so much, it was really very scattered. We didn't see a gender or sex effect.
Taking into account, 80% of those afflicted with osteoporosis on Earth are women. Again, the sex difference that we see is that when men do develop the disease, they have a higher death rate within the first year. We have small numbers of women who have flown. Basically, we've had about 120 flights that have engaged women, and over 41 people have qualified for long duration missions, but fewer women certainly for long duration missions. And what we have seen is that because we have a smaller number of women, our database isn't huge, and there is significant individual variability. But taking into account that men and women often come in with a different amount of bone, we have to be protective of both men and women.
So the act of just being in a microgravity environment, the fact that you're in one, your bone loss basically begins immediately, you said, and you can mitigate that bone loss just by exercise. Wouldn't it be preferable to have a simulated or somehow, like a simulated gravity environment in some way? Like in 2001, you got the spaceship,
the rotating thing.
Yeah, the spinning part. Wouldn't that be ideal, or is exercise really enough? Can you just...
Well, again, it's exercise, it's medications, it's nutritional support. We look at all these measures. It's not just one or the other. What you're talking about is creating artificial gravity, and artificial gravity is fantastic, except it's not been feasible. I think as we engage our commercial world, maybe perhaps we will get to that point one day, so that we can protect our bones. And then remember, when you're going to the moon, you're going to a gravitational field that's about 1/6 that of Earth, and I believe Mars is about 3/8. Yeah. And so you have to look at the variations of gravity on the impact of bone and muscle. But it would be wonderful if we eventually were able to develop artificial gravity.
When you spin, which is the way we create artificial gravity, it creates other problems as well. There are sensory neural problems. When you throw something in one place, it ends up somewhere else. So you have other adaptations that you have to do to a spinning environment. You have to also, the best thing would be for it to be very large so that you don't feel the change that it's moving at to create 1G. Then there's also, depending on your orientation, there's a gravity gradation. And so it's not ideal either. It has its issues. With bone and muscle loss, I would say that the HRP, the program, feels that they have developed enough countermeasures to to say that we could go on a long duration.
Okay. Well,
we've made significant progress. So you just have to be aware of it. And then I think what's exciting is the commercial space sector is engaged in space exploration. We're going to have people of all ages and all backgrounds and all different types of medical comorbidities. So I think what we'll be able to do then is to understand even more and be able to have perhaps even better countermeasures and also translate what we learn in space to larger populations on Earth.
okay. Harley, before I ask the next question, can I get you to please turn off your email notifications?
Yes.
Thank you.
Same as it ever was.
Yes. Okay. So, so you feel like what you've said, that you feel like you've got the bone loss and the calcium and things like that, sort of, you've got ways to deal with that. I read in one of the slides, what we were just looking at, something about things that were referring to the hormone levels that can change between men and women. Is that basically, are there things specific to being in space that affects the hormones of both men and women in different ways? And is that going to lead to like an environment where everybody's fighting with each other, or do you have like drug treatment ideas for how to maybe balance hormone imbalances or any of that kind of stuff?
As an endocrinologist, I find space absolutely fascinating. And, keep in mind that we're influenced by melatonin, it's signals from light that impact our other hormones. We've looked at sex hormone levels in men and in women. One of the issues we think about, for example, is a decline in estrogen.
Right.
Does that have an impact on bone? And the answer we know is yes. But we also, what you're bringing up is the physiological issues, but also the psychosocial issues. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more time to talk about that because it's extremely important. We see differences in psychosocial health between men and women on Earth, and certainly we could appreciate that there may be some changes in space, although right now we have extraordinarily well-selected crews. We train them for quite a long time. They learn to adapt to each other's communication styles. We are paying very close attention, but I think again, as we go into the commercial world, we have to be as equally adept. I want to talk about a syndrome that's extremely important, and it was called VIP in our papers. It stood for Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure Syndrome, and it's now got a new acronym in its SANS, and that stands for the Space Adaptation Neuroocular Syndrome. And basically what's happening is that there's a shift of fluid in the brain, and that type of fluid, cerebral fluid, has pressure on our ocular system, and our astronauts begin to experience eyesight changes. Interestingly, what we have found is that men and women have changes on scans, on imaging, but the men tend to be more significantly impaired. We don't really understand the etiology and why that is. We wonder if there may be some impact with the hormonal milieu, because we know estrogen, for example, is a vasodilator, allows you to accommodate shifts in fluid, and if maybe that has some impact. There's a lot of theories right now that are being tested, but it's going to be an extremely important issue to solve, because when you travel, you need to have your eyesight, and we need to be able to protect that part of our bodies.
And some of it is not, it's not completely reversible when they come back to Earth. The other part about it is, like Saralyn had mentioned, when we first did our study, we really had only 8 women, I think, who stayed long duration on space station. So we couldn't even tell if this was a significant difference or not. However, studies that have gone on since then have still shown that it's more predominant in the men than it is in women.
But you're getting better. You hope to get better data on all of this stuff as time goes on, right? You said that the astronaut corps has gone from about a 20% female population to 30.
It's up to about 35% now.
35. Okay, so we're hoping, I think, as we're in space more, you'll gather more data. Do you think you'll have an?
That was a very important recommendation for us, is that we needed to fly more women, because if you don't fly women and study them in space, you can't make sure that the countermeasures are working or not.
Of course, of course. Well, one of the things that worry a lot of us, and I know this is true of a lot of the viewers watching, and I think about this all the time, are the effects of radiation on everybody up in space. I mean, the International Space Station is pretty heavily shielded, but it's also protected by our magnetosphere a lot. And so, well, if we go to the moon and Mars, that won't necessarily be true. So what sort of work are you looking at with respect to radiation on gender, and is it a gender issue, or is it mostly just it's across the board bad for everybody?
Well, it's a sex-based issue, and it is across the board bad for everybody, and we have different levels of dosage that one can be exposed to. What we have seen is that women are extremely susceptible for their lungs, thyroid tissue, their reproductive structure. And we are dealing with solar radiation, and we're also dealing with galactic radiation, heavy iron particle radiation. So it's a significant issue. We're looking at, do we need better shielding? Are there any type of modalities that we could take, perhaps nutritionally? We're looking at other agents that you could take in case you've been exposed to try to mitigate some of the severe side effects that can happen, severe side effects. We have different levels, thresholds for men and women, and we don't want that to be a game stopper for women, that they reach their threshold and they're not going to be able to do the long duration missions that are going to be required to go back to the moon and to go on to Mars and beyond.
The other thing is we do look at shielding. There's many ways right now. They look at taking trash that we have and compacting it and eventually putting it on the outside of the spacecraft so that it would provide shielding.
And even looking, for example, at other fluids to block radiation transmission, such as urine or water.
But it is a gender-specific problem as well, because it does limit. Right now, women are allowed to be exposed to much less radiation than men.
Women are, what do you mean women are allowed? There are rules for this?
Limit that we determine is safe for them. Is that the way?
Yeah, it's different thresholds. There is some question, again, about individual variability, and we need to be clear about that, how the data was obtained. But I think it's a serious issue for both men and women. We know radiation has an impact on all our cells in our body. We certainly think about the development of cancer, cataracts, changes in brain structure. Does it cause forms of dementia, even cardiovascular disease? And you know, we're becoming more attuned to these issues even here on Earth. We used to be a little more cavalier about prescribing CAT scans for our patients, and yet we're exposing patients to significant dosages of radiation over time when we continue to do that. So I think we have a lot of lessons we can learn from the space program to have terrestrial benefit.
And that is, in the research program, that's still considered one of the top halls. It is still the one area that we don't feel that we have enough research information and enough countermeasures.
You know, talking with you guys and talking with Arnold last year and just reading a lot of articles on this topic, the more amazed I become by the idea of how adapted we are to our own planet. I mean, we really are made to be here on the planet Earth right now. I mean, that's how well, you know, we're in such a finely tuned condition that going outside of that seems exceedingly dangerous. I mean, everything I've read, you know, is saying that, you know, space is obviously hard, but it's also quite dangerous for the human body. Are you guys confident? I mean, I've heard people say flat out, we're not going to be able to go to Mars. It's just going to kill us. You know, that's been an extreme statement, but I have heard doctors say, or read in their articles, that they don't think we're going to be able to go to Mars, period, or any of this deep space stuff. What are your thoughts on that? Are you worried about that we'll be able to survive at all? Just the health effects, notwithstanding all the dangers inherent in being in space.
I believe we are going to go. I think the nature of
exploration. Where we live, though.
And I'm happy to go as well. I think the nature of exploration is inherent with risk involved, and that you have to accept that. You try to minimize what you can, but you have to understand that almost everything we do has risk. I think with the rate of evolution of technology, we are answering many of the questions that we're raising today, so I'm pretty confident that we will be able to do it. And keep in mind that when people are willing to be explorers, to be astronauts, willing to go into space, they are owning that risk. What we're trying to do is minimize as best as possible. NASA has looked at every different risk imaginable. They bring on experts. And what we know today is certainly a lot larger than what we knew, a lot more abundant. We're filled with data today than we were many years ago.
We do the 1-year study on space station. There's plans for other 1-year studies like that to make sure that we can do that. And originally, way back when we first sent men into space, people didn't think you could swallow. People didn't think you could eat. People
thought your eyeballs would pop out.
So
yeah.
all of these have been overcome, and we have adapted. So you're right, our body has evolved in 1G, and we are best suited for that. But that doesn't mean we can't adapt to other conditions.
And exactly, we adapt to different environments, and what we can do is help those who are exploring worlds that are not Earth, help them to survive.
Yeah, but adapting takes time, and you know, you've got to go through a lot of failures to get to some successes, at least when we talk about evolution.
Are living in a world of artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality. So we have the use of technology today, and even in, just imagine in the next 5, 10, 15 years what we'll have at our fingertips to be able to do our jobs well and to do them safely.
Well, I get that there's risk, and I don't mean to, I know about the risk part, and that's something we can either choose to accept or not accept as an individual. But my point is space a hard limit? Do you know what I mean? Can we do it physically? Can we be in space for any length of time without dying?
I think the answer is yes for both of us.
Yeah, I think it's yes. You know, we're all going to die.
I agree. Yes, I know that too. But I guess I mean the act of going to space, will it kill us? Like
and this is why NASA and our partners are really committed to studying these issues and putting the support behind it. I think what we have learned is that when you put brilliant minds together, you come up with solutions. And I believe we'll be able to do that as well. And that's why we're looking at every single system in the body. You know, let's talk for a moment about orthostatic hypotension. That's a big word.
Okay, sure. First, we got to tell you what that is, but then we can bring that up.
And really what it means is that you get dizzy and you're at risk for fainting. As we mentioned, there's shifts in fluid in the body. When you go into space, you have cephalic distribution of blood flow. Basically, everything flows up towards the head because of the drop in gravity, the lack of gravity. But what happens is when our astronauts come back, that they may experience low blood pressure and be at risk for fainting. And this is where we do see sex differences. And the hormonal milieu, again, that issue of estrogen, which dilates our blood vessels, may be related to that, where there isn't as much vasoconstriction, tightening the blood vessel to maintain blood pressure. So our female astronauts experience a state of dizziness, and some of them have fainted. So we're understanding what this involves, and it also has impact as we get older. We see this with some of our older populations. So as we learn to treat this condition and to hopefully prevent it, we have benefit for our patients on Earth.
And that difference that we saw both when we did the study earlier and when we redid it later, that continued. So even when we flew more women, that has held true, that it's been statistically significant.
Yeah, so you know, the heart shape and size changes and the ability to pump blood changes, and we're looking at volume loading to try to mitigate it. We're looking at pressure suits. We have a greater understanding of what we need to do to maintain blood pressure.
That's very interesting. Okay, so you guys are doing a lot of studies on the effects of gender of being in space, and you're coming up with strategies for dealing with the differences, being aware that there are in fact differences between men and women, and we have to treat these astronauts in a way that's appropriate for their gender. I want to talk a little bit about psychology now. The health effects are being understood. What are we doing to understand the psychological effects? And I know that's got to be a gender issue too, because you know, men might react I assume would react differently in space to a stressful situation than a woman might. Can you comment on that a little bit? The gender issues associated with psychology.
I'll start it, and then I'll let Saralyn finish it. So, Rich, what you're asking is a lot of really good questions, because on Earth, for example, depression and anxiety are reported more by women. I don't know if it's really true that it's more, but it is true. Mm-hmm. So it is more by women. However, we didn't see that in space because we do a very good job of selection. We select our astronauts to not have these issues. However, there are different responses to stress, and then I'll let you describe if you want.
Yes, so women are more likely to be diagnosed with affective disorders on Earth, such as depression. Fortunately, on Earth, only about a quarter are appropriately diagnosed, and out of that group, only about a quarter are appropriately treated. what we do
Wow, that's not great.
pretty bad. And also, unfortunately for men, we misdiagnose depression in men as well. And they are more likely to be, if I can use the word, successful in killing themselves, because they often use more violent mechanisms and measures to do that. So we want to have a healthy population. You're in a confined space, you're in a stressful environment, your sleep patterns are altered. And so we help to train our astronauts to adapt to that environment before they go up. It's not to say that some of our astronauts haven't experienced issues. They have, and we try to help our astronauts process what's happening to them by having a pretty robust medical team that they can consult with. I think as we move into the commercial space world, we really do need to be cognizant of these issues so that both men and women can interact well and safely together. We're also going to have cultural issues. We know men and women from different cultures communicate differently. When you go into space, you tend to develop what's called a moon facies, and your expressions may shift. So trying to read body language may be altered. So that's going to be extremely.
Well, there's something you don't think about much, do you? That's a good point. We rely very heavily on how we read somebody. And
people could be upside down, floating past you. I mean, it's very.
Yeah, that doesn't happen often on Earth.
The behavioral health issues that you're describing are again, one of the other long hauls, not just the radiation. And because you're isolated, you're separated from your family, the communication to Earth will not be as easy as it is here now.
So we have analog environments, for example, NEMO looking underwater, having people in volcanic regions in Hawaii who are isolated. Our Russian partners have conducted 500-day studies. Unfortunately, they only used men in their first cohort. And so we want to see, mixed gender teams working together. There's some data to show that a single gender team tends to like working well with each other. But we have found that as they train together and they learn to work with each other, that these diverse teams actually do better. And we even see that in our workplace here on Earth. We see that more diverse teams have better outcomes. So we just have to help foster discussion and dialogue to help people communicate and know how to work with each other.
How confident are you in our ability to screen out? I don't mean screen out, but screen for the traits, the psychological traits that you're looking for. I mean, one thing you don't want to do is train somebody in a way that suddenly gives them PTSD, right? So, I mean, you need to, before you start the training, you kind of want to know if how this is going to adversely affect them. Do we have a good set of criteria that we look at when we're considering people?
Well, you have many decades of a space program, and I think we have a pretty robust cohort, and we have a lot of data to show that we've been able to do it pretty successfully. Again, keep in mind, you're dealing with a really unique population. These are superstars. As we move into the commercial world and you have that diverse group of people going out from all different walks of life and experiences, I think there's going to be some really interesting findings in this.
In the commercial world, you could easily see people go into space who's had no training. All they have is $1 billion. And so they're there just because they've got the money. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see, well, maybe not, it'd be scary maybe to see the kind of effect that has on someone who's not been screened at all, other than, do you have the money?
And the teams also train together. They train for some of them for years before they go in space. So they really know each other very well. So it is an issue, and it is one of our concerns, quite frankly, still, but we feel at the moment that it's under control.
And as I mentioned, we have other analog environments. Several years ago, I went down to Antarctica, and we had one of our passengers who had a psychotic break, and she was trying to destroy some of our vehicles and injure others. And it was an interesting time because we were in an isolated environment and we had to take care of a passenger. We needed to protect her, but we also needed to protect ourselves. So I think, looking at really all different types of environments will share with us important lessons of how we need to work and how to protect everybody.
Oh, Saralyn, that sounds like a Stephen King movie there. It must have been scary.
One of the other things, though, like right now we've been talking all about the health effects, and that was really most of what our work focused on. However, there's making sure the engineering is adapted to both men and women is also really important.
Of course. Yeah, this one suit doesn't fit all, right?
Exactly. One of the issues way back that both Saralyn and I were involved in is that in order to save money, we stopped building the small spaces. Mm-hmm. So we built medium, large, and extra large. Well, the small actually fit better most women. And it's not just size, but it was the shoulder ratio, and it made it very difficult for people to move their arms.
So let's talk about this for a moment. Back in August of 2016, NASA held an iGIANT roundtable, again, the impact of gender and sex on innovation and novel technologies, to look at how the machine-human interface plays a role, to look at various technologies across the spectrum. And some of our female astronauts attended this session and stated that they felt like they were floating in their EVA, their spacesuit that allowed them to do their spacewalks, because it didn't fit the way their body moved in space. We have seen this also with military pilots, for example, so we have lessons to learn from the Department of Defense and other agencies. So it's technology across the spectrum, and our engineers have been pretty clear that they like for us to get to them, to talk to them earlier while they're in the design phase, because it's much easier to develop a product on the pre-side rather than once something has been developed and then try to retrofit.
Okay, I just want to say real quick, Harley, we got about 5 minutes left. Did you want to, you've got a hard deadline at 4 o'clock, right? You've got to go?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, and it'll be about 4, and after my questions, I will quietly depart. Space exploration, human exploration will be, well, it's already international, will become more international. What contributions have our international partners been making, research contributions that you all can use, that we all can use in these areas?
All our partners have. They're all contributing. They're looking at sex and gender. Certainly, many of these countries have a pretty strong research environment to look at terrestrial impact, and then from the space agencies, they've been engaged as well. And I think looking at that whole compendium of data will help us as we develop policies, procedures, and protocols to keep us healthy in space.
And we have an International Space Life Science Working Group where all the partners get together and share their data and share this kind of research.
And then second question, then I said I'll quietly withdraw and go off to my next telecon, is that, so what Bette and Saralyn, what is the biggest challenge, would you all say over the next, if you could be Tsarina of NASA, what would you like to do, in addition to, of course, more money? What is the big challenge that you would like to see solved or addressed or investigated over the, say, coming 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question, and I think human system integration is extremely important. Through Dr. Rich Williams, he developed a project called the Rosetta Stone Project, which tried to help facilitate and is facilitating communication between research and medicine and engineering and outreach so that we're all speaking the same language. And I think that is extremely important. If I had my wish list, I would have everyone see the world through a sex-gender lens. Everyone would accept that men and women interact very differently to technology and with technologies, and that we speak from the same language so that we can expedite the products, the policies, the protocols, and the programs that we need to have to keep men and women healthy in space, to live well, and to do their jobs safely.
And with our study, we had a series of recommendations for each group. And that's one of the things that Saralyn and I would like to work on too, to see how many of these recommendations are being followed. It's
extremely important.
Right, and so we've mentioned some of them, like there are spacesuits now that are being developed that have different joints in the shoulder that do accommodate women. In fact, women are very often in charge of this new research. So just making sure that we protect the health and safety of both men and women.
And I think timing is extremely important. We're putting into place right now policies and programs that are going to be with us for the next 10 to 20 years.
Right.
So it's extremely important that we look at what we are doing now, where do we need to go, what can we do better. So having the midterm reviews of our decadal review will be extremely important, and ensuring that we bring our engineers, our scientists, our clinicians, and our astronauts and our policymakers into a room so that we really thoroughly discuss these issues and develop a robust program.
Wow, that's a good place to, All right. So this is me. I'm live now. So, but that was a recording that we had done during the normal time slot of the Hangout from 3 to 4 o'clock. My guests were Dr. Bette Siegel. She was she works on these sex and gender issues at NASA HQ. Also, a medical doctor, Saralyn Mark. She's the president of the nonprofit called iGIANT, and both of them joined us with Harley Thronson to talk about the sex and gender issues of going into space. And they agreed to absolutely come back another time when we can actually interact with people on a live basis. But it's very frustrating because so for those of you who are interested in the topic at hand, that is the Hangout. I am now going to spend a couple of minutes and just sort of interact and generally speak my mind, because I have a lot of things to say about these Hangouts and the future of deep astronomy and things like that. So one of the things that I love about these Hangouts is that they bring an in-depth sort of feeling to, or process to, a lot of topics that we only hear about superficially on the internet. Things like, space.com and those places. They do a great job covering space, but you just get the stuff that you heard in the press release. And I like to get these people in and at your disposal so you guys can interact with them directly. And that's one of my favorite things about doing these Hangouts. And while I realize an hour long sitting there in a thing on YouTube is probably not what most people do, I actually think there's enough people out there to justify doing this. And when you look at all the other efforts that Deep Astronomy does on YouTube, from doing Spaceman News to doing the space documentaries, these Hangouts are the ones that bring in the most financial support from me, because I don't necessarily look at you guys, the people watching the content on YouTube and soon to be other platforms, as the customer. I actually look at the scientists as the main customer for Deep Astronomy, because they don't have a lot of avenues and channels to get to the general public. And so I kind of look at the astronomers as the main customer of my service, because there is a lot of need out there for astronomers to be able to get their word out about their research. And so that's why these Hangouts are incredibly important. Most people on YouTube don't have the attention span to sit through an hour-long Hangout. I really don't care, because this stuff interests me and I like to do it. Now, almost all of you watching right now and soon to be watching on the archive after this live stream is over, have stuck with me. You guys have you've seen the bad sound, you've heard the bad sound, you've seen the bad video, you've seen the crap production quality that I have, and I want you to know I work very hard to try and improve that. But it seems like, and every time I got things perfect, I think I've got it perfect, I go to hit the stream button and it's like some kind of gremlin comes out of nowhere and completely throws everything off. I want you to understand that I do this by myself. I got zero help. Sometimes when I can find somebody, I have people like Scott Lewis from long ago and Carl Clark more recently to help me with the live stream attention span stuff. They help me gather in comments and questions throughout the Hangout so I can concentrate on other things. But I have a lot to do. There's a lot of things that go into a live stream. So I've spent some of the money that I got from the AASs on upgrading the software. I had a laptop crash a couple of months ago. I bought a new Windows laptop because I'm trying to get away from Mac. I have a video capture card. I have all this stuff. And so I get Wirecast Pro, and I'm very psyched about it, right? Because it has built into it the ability to have up to 7 people call into the little interface. I don't have to use video conference software. It's built into Wirecast, and it's very good software. I did last night's Hangout using it. In fact, the one with Bernie Taylor, where we talked about ancient astronomy. And so these guys come up. Now, the software only works, the call-in software only works on Firefox and Chrome browsers, and apparently I had only tested this on Chrome because everybody called in today. Harley and the two ladies called in, Betty and Saralyn, on Firefox, and I couldn't get it to work. And when I finally did get their stuff to work, I hit the stream button and Wirecast kept crashing. 5 minutes before 3. Okay. And so I'm sitting here scrambling. I don't know what to do, guys. I don't know what to do. You want to reschedule? Because I'm dead in the water. And so we decided to go ahead and record it because they were very busy and I really wanted to get the content out. And then so we did what we did today. I'm sorry. I do all I can, and I know that you guys deserve better. Certainly people like Fraser Kane does a much better job with the production quality. He produces great content, and you guys are struggling along with me. I do appreciate it. I really, really do. But you also need to know that every dime you give to Deep Astronomy goes back into stuff like this. I use it to buy video cameras. I use it to buy microphones. I use it to buy software, and I use it to buy a laptop, and that's why we're currently strapped right now. But the point I'm making is I want to thank you for sticking with me on all the technical issues. There's Adam. Hey, Adam. So, yeah, random thought. Be sure your hardware and software isn't updating while you're trying to use it. I know. We've all been there. We're trying to start something, and then Windows Update wants to do some some stuff. So, but anyway, so I just wanted to spend a few minutes thanking you guys for your patience on all of this. I know that there are lots of technical issues that you guys have to overcome to get to the content, and I do appreciate it. With Telescope Talk, in fact, Adam is here right now in the chat. We work to improve that a little bit. In fact, Adam, you're going to be calling in next time using Wirecast, so that'll be how that works. I'm also going to be posting more on Patreon because I want to make sure I'm giving the Patreon patrons content that they can appreciate. And really, when I think about it, they're the ones who are, everybody there is building a really strong community, and they really are serious about supporting what we do. And I need to be better at interacting with the Patreon patrons. It's just, when you're just one person, it gets to be overwhelming. Oh, another thing I'm doing, when I had that laptop crash, it was my Mac, and on my Mac I used Final Cut Pro X. Well, when I bought this Windows laptop, I got Resolve, which is a free video editor. Very nice, very capable, but the learning curve is like, really steep. So I am currently in the process of doing that. A Space Fan News episode used to take me 4 hours to make from the time I wrote the script to the time I posted it to YouTube. Now it's more like 8 to 11 hours. So it takes me a lot longer because I'm learning all new software. The reason I did that was not only did I have a laptop crash, but the import of the video from my video camera was causing pixelation and artifacts. So this isn't easy, at least not for me. And it would be great to have a team of people doing this, but unfortunately Deep Astronomy is nowhere near on that level. So thank you all. Is it Camp De Jong? I'm messing up your name. I'm sorry. I'm an American. I don't know how to pronounce anything. You sent an email about an upcoming Hangout, which is going to be on computing. So I'll work on getting that scheduled as well. Hans Milling, it's not the quality of the audio or video, it's the content we love. I know, but wouldn't it be great if you could actually hear and see what we're talking about? So anyway, I wanted to prove that I could do this, even and that the streaming software is working. I have finally enough bandwidth. That was another issue. You may remember several Hangouts in late 2017 where I couldn't get enough bandwidth. Everything was pixelated. And the reason for that was my ISP, when we got hit by Hurricane Irma here in Florida, one of the traps, it's a trap, and I don't know fully what that means, but it's up in the cable, the internet wire on the the lines that go over the street. One of the traps was full of water. and that was causing my throughput to plummet from 200 megabits per second download to less than 1. And my upload speed went to crap too. And upload speed in this business is way more important than download speed. So that took me about a month to sort out, because I had to argue with Spectrum, my ISP. They kept coming out every single day and trying something different, and it still wasn't working. So that was also an issue late last year. You see, you can use Kickstarter for creating a better studio. Does that really work, though? I don't know if I've got a big enough base to actually make that work. Now, Kevin Lewis for the Planets Foundation, they started a Kickstarter, which worked really well, I guess, for them. Remember, they made those exocubes, and we had the ExoLife Hangouts. That apparently worked really well. So maybe you got something there. But the bottom line is, I think I need help. I'm going to have to start getting help. Doing this all by myself is just not enough. So, okay. Well, I'll look into that. And you like my studio. It's not much. It's just my office. So, okay, guys, I'm going to stop the stream. I'm going to be making more content for Patreon. So if you feel so inclined, become a Patreon patron. $1 a month is all. I mean, it doesn't take much. And you can even do it for 1 month and stop. You know, I mean, it doesn't have to take, doesn't need to be that much. I would certainly appreciate it. And I'll try and be more on there. The thing is, I don't always know what kind of content to put there. I think what I'm going to do is post more personal content there. I don't feel comfortable being out in the open here on YouTube with my personal stories. So I may do that on Patreon. So look for that if you are one. Get Casey Neistat to recommend your videos. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, that would be great. All right, guys, I'm going to head out. Thank you guys for watching. I'm sorry the stream was delayed. I'm sorry it was recorded. And we'll be back next Wednesday with Telescope Talk, where I think we're going to be talking with some guys who have a program for giving free telescopes out. And Adam, hopefully you'll be with me on that, as well as John Suffel and Alexander Ranger. So look for that next Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern. And, of course, Astro Coffee will be back with Carol Christian at the day after, and we're working on getting the guests together for that. So take it easy, and I appreciate. Thank you, Delbert. I do appreciate that. I do. That means a lot. What you just said. Thank you for that. Okay. Off we go. Have a good night, folks. Leave comments on the video about what you'd like to see, kind of content you want. Space Van News will be. I'm making videos now. As I said, I'm editing with using Resolve. So but Space Van News is coming. I've got vlogs on the way. Lots of things. So thank you guys all so much for watching. And as always, keep looking up.